So we're talking about Joseph tonight, and you might be wondering, what does Joel's story of taking risk and initiative and painting to raise funds for Helping Hands have to do with a guy that gets sold into slavery into Egypt? And I promise you, we're going to get there. Would you flip with your Bibles or in your Bibles, which are on your chairs, to Genesis chapter 37. Genesis chapter 37. For those of you that don't know what Helping Hands is a street mission on Barton Street in Hamilton, in one of the poorest and most destitute neighborhoods in Canada. Not just in Ontario, in Canada. And what we do is we partner with them. We go down and we help operate the mission on Saturdays. If churches like Lift didn't step up to the plate, if we weren't willing to say, yes, we will go, we will do it, the mission would not be open on Saturdays. So we go and we run their store for them. It's kind of like the store where you get to pick out clothes, give honor and respect to people that maybe are a little bit down and out in life, and get to have some conversations in their coffee shop. It's just a wonderful, wonderful, hopeful place. And just as a bit of an advertisement, we're going to be there next Saturday, so you should join us, and actually the following Saturday, so June 27th and July 4th. All right, so are you in your Bibles? Genesis chapter 37? All right, let's just take a moment and pray. Father, thank you for the stories that you've given us in the scriptures. God, that there are stories where we don't just look at them and go, that was a nice story. But God, that they are means of you communicating to us. That when we open ourselves to the possibility, we find ourselves in the stories, but we also find you. God, I pray tonight that you would challenge our thinking and that you would open us and open our hearts up to the possibility that you would speak to us through your scriptures. Amen. I should just highlight, because it's painfully obvious, and I've been asked a million times, no, I'm not having an allergic reaction. No, I did not get into a bar fight, but my eyes are very, very bloodshot. I had a bit of a mishap getting laser surgery done on Friday, and it didn't quite go the way I'd wanted to. So I both can't really see, and my eyes are really bloodshot. So forgive me. If you want to know the whole story, come and talk to me afterwards. All right, Genesis chapter 37. We're going to start in verse 3, and we're going to read about Joseph. Now Israel. Now last week we talked about Jacob. Israel, Jacob, same person. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that his father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf rose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us, or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream, and he told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." So he had 11 brothers. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come down to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. This is the classic passage on Joseph, where he has these dreams that he's dumb enough to tell his brothers that you're going to bow down to me. I don't know if you have a brother. This is not the thing to say to your brother. I was playing Jenga at a wedding today with my brother, and we got some proper brotherly competition going on over a game of Jenga. Now, can you imagine this to like the next level, where it's like, you're actually going to bow down to me? Don't recommend it. If you were thinking about it, stop thinking about it. It's not a good line of thinking. See, Joseph was kind of this ostentatious dreamer. He was this guy that had these bold dreams, these bold visions for who he would be. He had dreams of greatness despite being young. he had dreams of almost ridiculous things. And tonight I want to talk about dreams. I want to talk about ambition. I want to talk about the hopes that we have within us and what they are rooted in. Now, to understand how we're going to do this with Joseph, it's more than just a guy who has a bunch of crazy dreams. See, to understand the story of Joseph, you actually need to read 14 chapters of Genesis. But as I did last week, I'm not going to do that to you this week. I'm not going to read the whole story. So I'm going to quickly give you the summary, and then we're going to come back and understand the rest of it. So as I said, it's 14 chapters. It's actually kind of only 13 if you exclude 38, but we'll come to see that 38 is really a commentary on 39. So the story goes like this. So he has these dreams. His brothers hate him. Possibly rightly so, not clear. His father sends him out to go and pass on a message to his brothers in the field. His brothers see him coming and they plot to kill him. Then they say, well, actually, let's not kill him. Let's just throw him in the cistern. And then they throw him in the cistern. And they say, well, you know what? Let's sell him into slavery. So Joseph ends up getting sold into slavery to Egypt. Now, when he gets to Egypt, he gets picked up in a guy named Potiphar's house. As he starts to work his way through Potiphar's house, Potiphar was the captain of the guard. And he works his way up to being the most important person in Potiphar's house, sort of a key figure in Potiphar's house. Now, it's funny. Here, the story takes a random excursion. Chapter 38. We kind of leave Joseph aside for a sec. So Joseph's in Egypt. He's been sold into Egypt. He's hanging out with Potiphar. And we go and hang out with Judah and Tamar. So Judah was Joseph's brother. And what ends up happening with Judah is that he ends up, first of all, his sons become incredibly evil. They die. Not a good scene. So Judah ends up sort of accidentally, not really clear exactly how you would confuse this, but he ends up sleeping with his daughter-in-law and making her pregnant. She pretends to be a prostitute. He gets kind of confused. She comes back and says, I'm pregnant. And he says, well, you need to die. This is evil, what you have done. And she says, well, actually, it was you that did it to me. And he's like, that's awkward. Which it would be. And he's like, actually, okay, you're not as evil. I'm really the one that's messed up. Yes, Judah, you are messed up. You got your daughter-in-law pregnant. That's not what you want to do. Now, it's kind of just a fascinating story. She ends up having twins. One of them is Perez. Now, this is just a totally random tidbit, but this is one of the beautiful moments in the scriptures where something that is so incredibly broken, this story of Judah and Tamar, it is a messed up story. You can go read the whole thing. I'm only scratching the surface here. It is messed up. But one of the sons becomes a part of the lineage that leads to Jesus. See, what we see when we read the scriptures is that God takes the most broken, the most messed up, the most horrific situations, and he redeems them for his glory. And that's what's happening with Perez. We'll come back to the story in a minute. So back to Joseph. He's hanging out with Potiphar. Joseph working in Potiphar's house. Potiphar's wife kind of gets a thing on for Joseph, tries to have sex with him, doesn't go very well. Joseph takes off running. She tears his cloak off. Second time the guy's lost his cloak. Guy's really got to learn to keep his clothes on. He gets in a lot of trouble, gets thrown in prison. Not a good scene. So the guy's now gone from slavery, climbed up the ranks to kind of like top slave, and now he's back in prison. So he starts climbing the ranks again. He makes good friends with the jailer. He becomes kind of the number 2 man in jail. How's that for on your resume? I was the boss hog in jail. He's in there for a couple years. Things are going kind of like okay. He's making it work, but he's still in jail. Eventually, the cupbearer, which is sort of like the right-hand man of Pharaoh, and his baker get thrown in prison because Pharaoh's very upset with them. They both have dreams. In both of these dreams, different things happen. In the first dream, the cupbearer, in the cupbearer's dream, Joseph interprets it to mean that he is going to be reinstated. And he is. The cupbearer is reinstated. In the baker's dream, Joseph interprets the baker's dream to mean that he's going to be executed. How's that for a crappy interpretation? Joseph, you told my buddy that he was going to get reinstated, and then he goes and tells the baker that he's going to get impaled on a spike, which he did. Not a good scene. The cupbearer forgets about Joseph until several years later, when Pharaoh has a dream and no one can interpret it, the cupbearer says, I know a guy that can interpret dreams, and he will tell you the truth, even if it's not a nice truth. So Pharaoh hauls Joseph out of jail, cleans him up, gives him a bath, gives him clothes this time. Very nice guy. And Joseph interprets the dream to mean that there will be 7 years of great plenty in Egypt, followed by 7 years of horrific famine. Pharaoh says, I like this guy. And he then promotes him up the ranks until he is the #1 guy beside Pharaoh in all of Egypt. He oversees the grain production. He buys up all the land. He is the man in Egypt. The most powerful person in the world, Joseph becomes. Now, the irony of the story is that his brothers end up stuck in the famine and come begging for food. And sure enough, Joseph's dreams are fulfilled. They come begging for food from Joseph. They don't know it's Joseph, but they come begging anyway. Ultimately, Joseph ends up meeting his brothers. He's very gracious with them, and he says, you know what? It's all right. Let's put that behind us. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to give you land here in Egypt. And that's how the Israelites ended up in Egypt and in slavery. But that's another story. That's 400 years down the line, which we will get to not in this series, because next week is Samson. It's going to be a good time. All right. So that's kind of your really quick high-level overview of 14 chapters of Genesis. I did it as quick as I could. Now you're going to wonder why I went into detail. We're going to come to different aspects of this story. So Joseph was a man that had dreams. He had dreams of greatness, and he never forgot these dreams. He was not a man that was wandering around going, oh, you know, I wonder how I ended up in slavery. You ended up in slavery because you dreamt that you were going to rule over your brothers and told them about it. But something very interesting happens. There's a pattern in Joseph's life that I started to look at. I said, okay, so Joseph rises to be this incredible leader. The leader, the most powerful person in the world. How did he do it? How did he go from nothing to something to nothing to something to nothing to the most powerful man in the world? And there's something fascinating. It's that in every instance of Joseph's leadership, he was led by somebody else. In every instance of Joseph's leadership, he was not the #1, he was always the #2. In Potiphar's house, in the jailer, he was second to the jailer, and under Pharaoh, he was second to Pharaoh. See, Joseph understood that that in order for him to accomplish something, he would need to serve somebody else's vision. Be it the captain of the guard, be it the jailer, or be it Pharaoh. He was willing to submit to that vision, even if it meant superseding his own. I suspect his desire was probably to go home, to go back to his family. But he said, you know what, I'm willing to serve this vision because it is the opportunity that is in front of me. It's kind of interesting, in our culture in the West, we tend to value the innovator. We tend to value the entrepreneur. We tend to value the one that takes risks. And we hold it up and say, look at these guys or these girls. They're the ones that are the risk takers. They're the ones that are leading the charge. And I wonder if we've overly allowed the American dream of you can make it yourself, you can be your own God, you can be your own king, to influence us to the point where we're no longer willing to ever come under somebody else's vision. See, I submit to you that until we learn to serve somebody else's vision, we won't truly be able to carry our own. In Genesis 39, verse 22, it tells this of Joseph. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. So Joseph was given this great responsibility, but he still had to acknowledge the authority and the responsibility of the jailer. See, he looks at his circumstance. He says, I am not the king of this circumstance, but I'm going to give 100% to what is in front of me. How many of us are willing to give 100% to something that isn't our own? How many of us are willing to give 100% to our work when we have to work for somebody else? How many of us are willing to give 100% into a relationship that doesn't really produce anything for us? How many of us are willing to put 100% into our schooling when we're jaded with it? How many of us are willing to put 100% into whatever it is that you're kind of only giving 50% to? But what Joseph demonstrates is that he is willing to give 100% every time the opportunity presents itself. Because he understood that in order for him to lead, he first needed to learn to serve. Until we learn to serve somebody else's vision, we will never be able to really carry a vision of our own. See, I think this is a fundamental aspect of our human psyche, is that we were not designed to be the only authority in our lives. We all long for it. We all long for us to be the gods of our lives. We all long for us to be the great kings. But I don't know that is what we were designed for. That's what the whole book of Judges is about. And maybe you're sitting there thinking, well, isn't this nice for the pastor who kind of gets to lead things and do what he wants to say, serve somebody else's vision? But the truth is that that's not the case. Even as a leader here at Lift Church, I have to defer to the leadership of our board, our denomination, to the things that God is doing across this country, and say, God, what are you calling us to as a church? What do we need to submit to as a church? This initiative that we're talking about at Brock is not just an initiative born out of our creativity here at Lift. It is part of a national strategy that we say, yeah, we're willing to step up. We're willing to serve this national vision. Now, there's two distinct things that Joseph does here that I think really stick out, that really capture the heart of what this looks like to serve somebody else's vision 100%. The first is that of excellence. He doesn't bring a mediocre leadership to the table. He doesn't look at the problem of, okay, we've got 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine coming, so I'm just going to, kind of store up a little bit. He ends up reconstructing the entire economic system such that he buys up all the land. And he positions the nation of Egypt to be one of authority and one of power. He does his role with excellence. He doesn't look and say it's good enough is good enough. He says, I'm going to bring the best that I can bring to the table. And the second thing is that of consistency. See, the one thing that we lose in the story is that there's a great deal of time that goes on. There's 13 years from the time Joseph is sold to the time he rises to power. 13 years he has to struggle. And for 13 years he is consistent. He shows up again and again and again and again and again. And he says, I will step up to the plate. The Apostle Paul understood this. He understood that our calling as Christians isn't to be mediocre. It isn't to be lackluster. It isn't to be like, well, that's good enough, and I'm just going to kind of do my own thing. Check it out, Romans 12. Don't just pretend to love others. Really love them. Hate what is wrong. I love the language here. He's putting it in black and white. Hold tightly to what is good. Love each other with genuine affection and take delight in honoring each other. This is the part I love. Never be lazy, but work hard and serve the Lord enthusiastically. Rejoice in our confident hope. Be patient in trouble and keep on praying. When God's people are in need, be ready to help them. That is a beautiful passage. He goes on in Colossians 3, and whatever you do or say, do it as a representative of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through him to God the Father. Whatever you do, do it as a representative of the Lord Jesus. I know that when I read that passage, I say, yeah, I love that. That's sweet. But the truth is, it hurts sometimes. Because sometimes I'm lazy. Sometimes I don't want to work hard. Sometimes I don't want to represent Jesus. I kind of just want to represent my own kingdom. I'm going to be honest with you. The last few weeks at Lyft, I've been in a bit of a struggling situation here. At the beginning of the summer, we kind of polled our leadership and we said, okay, what kind of commitments do we want to make this summer to our partners here in Hamilton, Ronald McDonald House and Helping Hands? And we said, yeah, we're going to commit. We're going to take a risk this summer. We're going to step up and serve. But we're having a challenge. And the challenge is that of consistency. We're getting people saying, yeah, I'm willing to be there, but then not showing up when it matters. That hurts us as a community when we do that. When we put ourselves out there as a representative, as the church, you understand, Ronald McDonald House is not a Christian organization. We are the only church. We are the only organization they partner with because we're consistent. And they know we're a church. So when we say we're going to show up and we're going to have 10 people there and 2 people show up, that hurts. It hurts the church. It hurts our witness. Consistency and excellence. Sometimes we want to make consistency and excellence about the big and the glamorous and the glorious, but the consistency and excellence starts in the details. It starts with showing up. It starts with being there time and time and time again. And for many of you, I know I am preaching to the choir. But for many of you, I know that consistency is a struggle. It's been a struggle for me at times. See, the irony is as we start to serve another vision, as we start to say, yes, I will be there, yes, I will come under something else, we actually gain a great deal of freedom. This is what Joseph's life demonstrates. In his willingness to serve somebody else's vision rather than his own because he couldn't, he actually gained freedom. There's a tendency, I think, when we look at these situations, when we look at what Joseph is doing, to say, man, this guy's got it going on. He's got it going on. He's able to just kind of climb the ranks. He's able to work his way out of slavery. He's able to make friends with the jailer and to make friends with the cupbearer. How on earth did he do it? He must have been walking around and strutting his stuff and holding his head high. I mean, like, yeah, I'm the man of the jail. But that's another story. In Genesis 39, something very interesting happens. 3 times the narrator repeats this doxology, this phrasing. It says 3 times, the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. Why does it say that? Because the narrator wants us to understand that despite Joseph's great successes, it was not Joseph doing it on his own strength. It was not Joseph doing it because he was awesome. He was willing to defer to one who was greater than him. So Pharaoh pulls him out of prison. Pharaoh's got a problem. He needs to understand this dream that he has. So he pulls him out of prison. And Pharaoh says, I know you're an interpreter of dreams. You're going to interpret these dreams. But then Joseph replies with the most peculiar reply. Imagine you've been in prison for years. And your ticket out of prison is literally seconds away from you. All you need to do is just tell the Pharaoh what he wants to hear. Just answer the dream. Explain the dream. Look at Joseph's response. It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Imagine you've been in prison for years. And all you need to do is answer this pagan, this confused Pharaoh, king, God figure. Just tell him what he wants and make yourself look good in the process. All Joseph has to do is make himself look good, and he's out of prison. And what does he do? He says, it's actually not me. I'm not the one that's going to ultimately save things. I'm not the one that has the answers. The Apostle Paul expands this in Philippians 2. He says, for God is working in you, giving you the desire and the power to do what pleases him. God is working in you. See, as you start to cultivate dreams in your life, as you start to dream dreams that are big and ambitious and bold. See, I don't believe that there was something fundamentally wrong with Joseph saying, I want to rule, I want to be in charge. If he was willing to acknowledge that it was not ultimately his value or his worth or his skill or who he was that would get him there, it was God's goodness and what God was going to do and how God would place him. because the Lord was with Joseph, and Joseph understood that. See, if we want to be people that change the world at Lift Church, if we want to be people that are transformative for the world around us, we have to be a people that understand that it is God who gives us the power and the desire to do what pleases Him. So there's this interesting juxtaposition coming back to the story of Judah and Tamar in chapter 38. So in chapter 38, we see Judah. He is massively sexually immoral. I mean, I don't care who you are. Sleeping with your daughter-in-law and getting her pregnant and then telling her she needs to die, that is messed up. That is not right. And then in the very next chapter, it's compared with Joseph, who presented with the opportunity to have sex with his boss's wife. He turns and he flees. Nobody was in the house, it says. Nobody was around at that time. It would have been easier for Joseph to just buy in and say, you know what? I just got to keep things on the easy here. I got to keep things smooth. I got to keep things cool. All I got to do is just compromise my character just for one moment here. We're just going to make a quick compromise just so that I don't end up in prison. But what does he do? He's steadfast. He says, you know what? I'm going to flee. I'm going to run from anything that would confuse my character. See, there's this interesting juxtaposition. On one hand, there's the brothers of Joseph who end up in the famine, who end up desperate, who end up begging, who compromise their character, who again and again and again make mistakes and turn out to be evil. And on the other hand, we see Joseph, who is unwavering even when it costs him. See, it's interesting. Twice, Joseph has his clothes ripped off him. Twice, Joseph is wearing a garment, and it is stripped from him. And in both cases, it was unjust. But you see, there's something about our outer garments. There's something about the way that we present ourselves that can always be taken away. Our position, our authority, our power, even our dreams can be stripped away from us. But you know what can't be taken away? Your character. And Joseph understood that. He understood that no matter how many times they stripped him of authority, no matter how many times they stripped him and left him naked and desperate, they could not take his character. See, sometimes there is a cost. Sometimes there is a cost to doing what is right, to being a man or a woman of integrity. And sometimes that cost is giving up our dreams. Sometimes it's giving up the thing that we're longing for, the promotion, the opportunity, the relationship, the friendship. Sometimes we have to be willing to give those things up so that when we finally arrive at the opportunity, we have the ability and the capacity to carry it. See, our ability to carry responsibility is a direct product of our character. Paul understood this. 2 Corinthians. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weakness, insults, hardship, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. See, Paul was willing to go through anything, but he was not willing to compromise his character. He was not willing to compromise what God was calling him to. Joseph had the chance when he's hanging out with his cupbearer. Put yourself in Joseph's shoes for a second. You've got the cupbearer who's a major figure in Egypt. And then you have the baker on the other hand. And you have a vision that is a good and a great interpretation of the vision for the cupbearer. You're going to be reinstated. You're going to be back in authority. And then his vision and his dream for the baker is one that you're going to die. Now, if Joseph was primarily interested in getting out of prison, if he was primarily interested in attaining power, don't you think it would have made more sense to try and please the baker? Say, baker, I want to make you happy. It's going to be great. But again, Joseph is faithful to the dreams that God has put on his heart. He's faithful to his character. He says, no, if this is what God is telling me, if this is what God is calling me to, this is what I have to say. See, the longer-term vision always yields rewards over short-term gain. A vision that protects our character, a vision that protects our integrity, will always yield longer-term fruit than the short-term gains of compromise. And we see it. Genesis 41. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph. And they called quickly and brought him out of the jail. And when he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came up before Pharaoh. See, Joseph was consistent, not just in his delivery and his behavior. He was consistent in his character. And ultimately, he was cleansed, he was bathed, and he was clothed again. And he was raised up to a position of authority. It's interesting, out of this we come to Colossians. I think it's an interesting metaphor that we're playing with here. Check it out. Since God chose you to be holy people he loves, you must clothe yourself. You must clothe yourself. What do we clothe ourselves with? With tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. You must clothe yourselves with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, and humility. See, the measure of your character is the ultimate plumb line on the driver behind the things that you long for. If you want to know where your heart is at, see where you're compromising. If you want to know where the idols, the things that you most treasure in your life are, check out what you do to protect them. See, what we do when we compromise our character in order to gain something, what we're doing is we're saying, this thing is more valuable than what God is calling me to. This thing, this opportunity, this job, this relationship is more valuable to me than what God would have for me. That, my friends, is an idol. And in Colossians, we are called to get rid of these things, to be the holy people of God. Lastly, tonight, Joseph was a man that was deeply hurt. If you put yourself in Joseph's shoes, he's betrayed and abandoned by his brothers, sold into slavery. He's then betrayed by his boss's wife. He's then forgotten by the men he helped get out of prison. He's a man that has walked through a great deal of hurt in his life. And the truth is, if we're ever going to be leaders, if we're ever going to put ourselves in circumstances where our dreams are being fulfilled, where God isn't giving us opportunity, it's going to mean that we're going to get hurt along the way. This is the nature of working with people. When we put ourselves out there, it means that we will sometimes get hurt. The question is not, will we get hurt? The question is, what is our response? In Genesis 45, Joseph meets his brothers. And it's a beautiful passage. It says this: I am Joseph, he said to his brothers. Is my father still alive? So his first concern is for his family. But his brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. Please come closer, he said to them. So they came closer, and he said to them, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery. But don't be upset, and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me into this place. Not only is he incredibly gracious, he's more concerned with their emotions than his own. He's a man that is operating in forgiveness. See, many of us want to be like Joseph. We want to be leaders. We want to be world changers. We want to be people that are put into positions of authority. But unless we're willing to forgive, unless we're willing to be gracious with people and accepting of their faults and say, yeah, you know, you hurt me. then I don't know that we'll ever be able to be the leaders that God is calling us to. Jesus demonstrated this better than anyone else. He was betrayed by his closest friends, specifically Peter. And after Jesus rose from the dead, in John chapter 21, Jesus is talking to Peter and he says to him, "Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me?" And Peter says, "Yes, I love you, Lord. Yes, I love you, Lord." And what Jesus was doing in this moment was he was looking at Peter's betrayal of him and saying, "I forgive you. And I'm going to reinstate you and I'm going to use you." I don't know what part of that resonates with you tonight. Maybe tonight you resonate with the call to be consistent and excellent. Maybe you resonate with the call to serve 100% wherever it is you're at. Maybe you resonate with the call to not compromise your character, to be men and women of integrity and faithful to the dreams that God has placed on your heart. Or maybe tonight, the barrier that's limiting your capacity to live in the fullness of what God would have for you is an unwillingness to forgive those that have hurt you. Joseph's story is profound. The things I just listed, I think, should cover just about everybody in this room. I know I find myself in them. So why don't we just bow our heads for a moment as a church? Pray.